Recently, I sat down with Tiffany Dawson, a STEMinist and expert consultant to technology businesses in the area of diversity and inclusion. Now, this is not the regular diversity conversation. If you're sick of hearing about macro concepts and ways that companies can start moving the needle, this is the conversation for you because we got quite granular around what individuals can do and how to create a culture that actually allows some of these great ideas to flourish. So if you want to hear about how flexible working is great, but if you're not leading by example, it's meaningless, this is probably the conversation for you. We also looked at how individuals can avoid conflict in the workplace and handle them in a professional and respectful way. And then the last point, which I thought was particularly interesting, was this concept of a talent funnel. We're still spending a lot of time thinking about how we're attracting diverse talent, and that comes a lot into employer branding as well, but perhaps a little bit less focus historically on how we're actually retaining and promoting diverse talent within our organizations as well. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
My name's Tiffany Dawson. I was a mechanical engineer, so I worked in the construction industry for about 8 years. But now I do something a little bit different. I help to tackle gender inequality issues in STEM. So STEM being science, technology, engineering, and maths. And I tackle this gender inequality issue from both sides. So on one side, I help STEM organisations to achieve gender equality by taking away some of the time commitment and confusion they've got around creating gender diverse workplaces. And on the other side, I help women who work in STEM and give them the vision and confidence they need to create wildly fulfilling careers without compromising their family and social lives. I think it's really important that we try and tackle it from both sides because both of them feed into each other. So I spend a large portion of my time thinking about a lot of the challenges organisations and individuals face when it comes to gender diversity and what they can do about it.
Beautiful. So I really like that you've got sort of both sides of the funnel, if you will, or supply and demand sides. And I thought maybe for this conversation, rather than, I'm sure we could talk about, the business case for diversity in the workplace and why we need to be inclusive and all those sorts of things. But let's take that as read. I think we all understand that at this point in time. But I'd love to delve into in a little bit more depth is actually talking about, what are some of these interventions and how do things practically play out for both individuals and organizations. And one of the things I thought might be good to start on is we've spoken in the past about how you see organizations go to kind of straight into solution mode rather than actually doing the research, doing the groundwork and understanding what those issues might be. And maybe it might be a slower path, but potentially have greater benefit over the longer term.
Yeah, totally agree. So lots of companies now have great policies, so family-friendly policies in terms of flexible working, joint parental leave, which is an amazing thing that's come out recently, or is starting to gain momentum, I guess. So having these policies are really good, but it's not enough just to have them in place. The other side of it is that the workplace culture needs to actually change in order to allow people to feel comfortable taking those policies on.
Yep.
So you see a lot of workplaces, and I'm sure lots of people listening to this can relate. So your workplace might allow you to take, flexible working. So you might be able to, by your contract, you're allowed to work at different times during the day as long as you get your work done or as long as you get your hours in. But there might be one or two people in the team, usually in more senior positions, who outwardly don't like that happening. So they might not necessarily say it to your face, but you might hear them talk about someone saying, oh, they're not in on time again, or they've left early, or whatever it is. So that kind of thing really needs to stop, because that actually means that having those policies there, it's almost damaging. You're kind of dangling a carrot in front of people's faces saying, hey, you can have this, but actually we'll look down upon you if you take upon these policies. So that's something that really needs to change. And that is a cultural thing that needs to be really led by the leaders within those organizations.
Yeah, so it needs to be demonstrated, right? Like we need to see people taking advantage of some of those policies and not just talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not, just a tick box exercise to have
Yeah.
those policies. I guess the quickest and easiest way to make this culture change happen is for senior leaders to actually be seen taking these
Yeah.
policies up. Um, so I've got an example of, I think you and I spoke about this the last time we talked.
Yeah, we can
I,
de-identify the
I
data.
yeah, yes. So I spoke with a woman who works in STEM, and she works part time.
Yeah.
She's got young kids, and she's got to work part time to make it work. And I believe her partner also works part time, so they kind of
Yeah,
tag
give
team
and
with
take.
picking the kids up and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, which is great. So that works with her her setup. And she actually works for quite a forward-thinking company, so very flexible, lots of great policies that are probably above and beyond a lot of similar companies in their competition. So all of that in place, which is great, but she's got one director who keeps trying to look for her while she is not working. So she works the same hours every week, um, but and her director knows that. And every time it's, say, Thursday afternoon, if she's not working, he'll come out of his office exclaiming, "Oh, where is this person? Oh, she's not in again." And he starts to make quite a big deal out of it. And other team members hear this. And so more junior team members are probably discouraged from taking
Yeah.
up flexible working in the future. So they might see it as a barrier for them to have the life that they want to lead outside of work. So it's incredibly damaging. The more the more frustrating part of it is that this director has a wife who works at a different STEM company, and she works part-time in order to look after their kids. So it's just something that hasn't really crossed his mind, that he's letting his wife do it but doesn't like
Yeah.
his team members doing that. So these are the sorts of things that we need to start bringing up to the surface and start talking about, so that one day maybe directors like this might hear this story and think, oh, actually that's something that I am doing, and I need to change
Yeah.
the way that I think as well.
Yeah. Sometimes maybe people just need to be made aware of these things, perhaps. It sounds like, maybe he thinks he's joking, or who knows what the rationale is,
Yeah,
but it's obviously undermining her in front of her team, and it's setting back, or making other people feel uncomfortable to take advantage of flexible working policies.
yeah, that's
So
right.
do you have any advice, if someone was in that particular individual's, shoes, what maybe could she do to bring it up with the director?
Yeah, I guess, every single situation is different, and your relationship with a director or someone senior
Yeah.
like that might be conducive to having a conversation or not. So I would say really have a think about, firstly, what you're comfortable with. But I'd like to remind anyone who's in that position that you always have a choice. So you have a choice to stay in that position. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up and you kind of are okay with how things are going because you're allowed to work part-time, then you're allowed to make that choice. Don't make yourself feel guilty for not speaking up if that is what you've chosen, because that is what's best for you. So I think that's a really important point to make, because lots of people feel guilty and pressured and they don't do something, and then it's just this vicious cycle of guilt.
Yeah.
So you always have a choice. If you choose to not speak up and you're okay with how things are going, then that's okay, and just move on. Alternatively, if you would like to speak up, always speak to whoever it is that's making you feel uncomfortable in private first. And I really encourage people to be honest with that person. So if you are feeling nervous, when you sit down for that conversation, just say, hey, I'm feeling a bit nervous about having this conversation. So sorry if I stutter over my words and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of makes the conversation a bit more
Breaks
human.
the barrier type thing, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you can just start, I guess, stating facts. It's really important in these difficult conversations that you do stick to facts rather than feelings at the start. So you can say, I noticed that you said this on Wednesday last week. Then you can say what the effect was. So when you said that, it made me feel like this, and therefore I would like to talk about what we can do about it, or whatever it is that you want to change. So yeah, I think having these difficult conversations can often feel really daunting because they are big moments. But if you just try and stick to the facts, then there's no real way of someone to kind of come back and say, oh, but I didn't mean to make you feel that way, or whatever.
Yeah. I really like that model. I feel like that's something really tangible that people can take away. And, this happens, and this is the result of that happening. Let's plot a course together to try and, come up with a workable solution. And the other thing that you've said then, which I think has never occurred to me in the past at all, and now I'm embarrassed to say that, was that actually deciding, not to do anything about it is a valid decision as well. That's probably an empowering realization to have, that, if you're comfortable with it, you're happy to maintain the status quo, as long as you've made the decision not to do anything about it, that's equally fine.
Yes, yeah, there's just so much, I guess, pressure and I guess guilt about trying, not doing something about an uncomfortable situation. But I guess the first thing to remember is it's not fair that you've had to deal with this situation in the first place. Don't go and kick yourself for not dealing with it in a certain way afterwards, because that's just a double whammy of guilt, which no one needs.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So zooming out a little bit, we've mentioned a couple of policies around, flexible work is a nice example there. We've sort of spoken about parental leave. That's obviously a policy. Both maternal and paternal leave is super important levers to be able to pull as an organization. I think the last one is talent pathways as well, right? Like making sure that there are ways to navigate a career and that they're open to everybody. What are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, I guess firstly to do with hiring talent, if I can touch on that quickly first. I see a lot of organizations who they want to do something about diversity. So they are putting a lot of time, effort, and money into hiring in diverse candidates, which is great and that's needed. But what they're forgetting to do is to look after the diverse talent pool that they already have and looking at how they're going to retain them. So another little story is that I recently spoke to a tech company that's quite big, and they had a specific team that traditionally suffered from poor gender balance. So lots of males, not very many females, and they kind of struggled with that in the past. So they had this hard and fast goal that they set. So they must hire in however many females in the next 12 months. So I spoke to the person in charge of that, and they hired in 10 females in the last 12 months, and they were really proud of that, and that was a great goal to achieve. But when they went back and looked at the numbers, they also lost 11 women during that 12-month period. So it's really important that we actually look at both sides. As you can tell, I'm a real sucker for looking at things holistically, but we really need to nurture both sides. So who's coming in and who is staying. Also, the thing is, if you're spending all this time and money and effort hiring in lots of females and they're all leaving, then this is literally throwing money out the window. So it makes, I guess, business and financial sense to firstly think about what you're doing to retain those women or your diverse candidates. And then once you've got that in place and you've got a structure that works, then start hiring in more diverse candidates that way.
Yeah, I think it
I've now
sounds like.
forgotten your original question.
Well, I mean, you've sort of answered it. I was thinking more about, how do we maintain some talent pathways? And really, it sounds like the point is, it's a funnel, really, isn't it? We think about kind of, diversity at all levels of a business, ensuring that, obviously, yes, we've got a talent funnel coming into the business, but then, we need to make sure they're not, leaving, perhaps earlier or than they perhaps should. And I think it was actually, did I see you run a survey? I don't know how recently it was, that said kind of the most common answer was that women left STEM businesses because they felt like a minority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, that was a while ago now. Good memory. Yeah, I think it was that, what was it? I think it was that they felt it was harder to gain the respect of their peers,
Right.
compared with their male counterparts. And that is a result of not having a gender balanced workforce. If you have more diverse, I guess, people in your team, then you don't need to stick to a status quo to gain respect from everyone. If everyone's different anyway, you're more respected for what kind of skills and talents you bring into your everyday work, rather than if you fit in or not.
Yeah. I think there's nothing worse than, looking around the room and feeling like you're in a minority, right? Or, regardless of what that may be. And I'm saying this as a, heterosexual white male, so I probably don't experience it nearly as much as most people who would, be listening or watching this conversation.
Yeah, but I guess on that point as well, having a diverse pool of people in your team makes even people in the majority feel more comfortable to be themselves. When you are one of the people who might conform to whatever the majority is, you don't feel like you can bring your whole self to work. You feel like you have to still conform to that. So it affects everyone, even people who don't suffer from, I guess, being a minority day to day.
Yeah, that's a good point. A quote that's always stuck with me around hiring for culture is, I think a lot of people think hiring for culture is, hiring someone you'd want to get a beer with after work, which obviously, has kind of like a stereotype associated with it. And then, people feel like they have to fulfill that role while they're going through an interview process, whereas it is clearly a more diverse team. You can be yourself at work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. Maybe when we've spoken a lot about organizations, what I'd love to get is some advice for individuals. And I think especially at the moment, unfortunately, we are 8 or 9 weeks into a lockdown. Unfortunately, a lot of people are being laid off, and there's all sorts of change. Who knows what the next 6 or 12 months are going to look like. But how can, I suppose, women or say minorities, I don't like putting women in the minority bucket because it's kind of 50% of the population. That's always seemed a bit strange to me. But how do people with diverse backgrounds go about actually finding a job they like at this point in time? What are some things they could be doing?
Yeah, so I guess if you're in a position where you don't have a job right now and you are on the lookout for a new job, I know it's frustrating and it might be a tough time at the moment, but on the other side, on the other hand, you can think of it as a way to kind of renew your career and renew the passion that you've got in your job. So I think the number one thing that lots of people forget to do when they're looking for a job is to actually think about what they want out of the job. I know it sounds simple when I say it out loud, but especially in times like this, it seems like a bit of a panicked scramble to try and get whatever job you can. Yeah, and I understand that some people might be in a difficult financial situation where they do need to do that. But even so, it's really important to think about what you want from a job. So even if you need to take whatever job you can at the moment, you can understand what you might want from your next role, or whether you can actually shape the role that you've received into something that you enjoy more or are more passionate in. So I think the easiest way to think about it is to, before you even go out looking for a job, to think about what your non-negotiables are. So things that you will not live without. So it might be a lower end, like a bottom end of a pay scale salary that you won't go below. There might be a specific number of days annual leave that you want, or there might be a specific flexible leave policy that you must have, otherwise you won't take the job. There's also the should have, so things that you would expect a job that you're looking for to give you. And also it's nice to think about the nice to have, so what bonuses you might love to have but you don't necessarily expect to get. So having a think about those three things, so your non-negotiables, should haves and nice to haves, is a really good starting point, because it's really important to think about that at the start when you've still got a clear mind, because we all know looking for a job can sometimes get very frustrating, and it can become a lengthy process, and you might get stuck into it and be like, oh, I give up, I'm just going to take this role. If you have those things written down at the start, you can always kind of go back to your notes from when you had a clear mind and say, no, I did say that this is a non-negotiable and I had a good reason for saying that. So no, I'm not going to take this role, or I'm going to negotiate on this before I sign on the dotted line.
It just becomes that North Star, to use an overused term, that you can hang your hat on, I guess. Right, well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Tiff. If people want to find out more about you and the work you're doing, where can they go? Where can they connect?
Sure. I guess the easiest place to find all of my contact details is via my website, which is www.tiffanydawson.co. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and on Instagram, so all my details are on my website there.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Tiff.
No problem. Thank you.